My thoughts were now wholly employed about securing myself against either savages, if any should appear, or wild beasts, if any were in the island. And I had many thoughts of the method how to do this, and what kind of dwelling to make. Whether I should make me a cave in the earth, or a tent upon the earth, and, in short, I resolved upon both, the manner and description of which it may not be improper to give an account of. I soon found the place I was in was not for my settlement, particularly because it was upon a low moorish ground near the sea. And I believed it would not be wholesome, and more particularly because there was no fresh water near it, so I resolved to find a more healthy and more convenient spot of ground. I consulted several things in my situation, which I found would be proper for me. First, health and fresh water I just now mentioned. Secondly, shelter from the heat of the sun. Thirdly, security from ravenous creatures, whether it was man or beast. Fourthly, a view to the sea, that, if God sent any ship in sight, I might not lose any advantage from my deliverance, of which I was not willing to banish all my expectations yet. In search of a place proper for this, I found a little plain on the side of a rising hill, whose front towards this little plain was steep as a house side, so that nothing could come down from me upon the top. On the side of this rock there was a hollow place worn a little way in, like the entrance or door of a cave, but there was not really any cave or way into the rock at all. On the flat of the green, just before this hollow place, I resolved to pitch my tent. This plain was not above 100 yards broad, and about twice as long, and lay like a green before my door, and at the end of it descended irregularly every way down into the low grounds by the seaside. It was on the north-northwest side of the hill, so that I was sheltered from the heat every day, till it came to a west and by south sun, or thereabouts, which in those countries is near the setting. Before I set up my tent, I drew a half circle before the hollow place, which took in about 10 yards in its semi-diameter from the rock, and 20 yards in its diameter from its beginning and ending. In this half circle I pitched 2 rows of strong stakes, driving them into the ground till they stood very firm, like piles, the biggest end being out of the ground about 5 feet and a half, and shapened on the top. The 2 rows did not stand above 6 inches from one another. Then I took the pieces of cable which I had cut in the ship, and laid them in rows, one upon another, within the circle between these 2 rows of stakes up to the top, placing other stakes in the inside, leaning against them about 2 feet and a half high, like a spur, to a post. And this fence was so strong that neither man nor beast could get into it or over it. This cost me a great deal of time and labor, especially to cut the piles in the woods, bring them to the place, and drive them into the earth. The entrance into this place I made to be not by a door, but by a short ladder to go over the top, which ladder, when I was in, I lifted over after me. So I was completely fenced in, and fortified, as I thought, from all the world, and consequently slept secure in the night, which otherwise I could not have done. Though, as it appeared afterward, there was no need of all this caution from the enemies that I apprehended the danger from. Into this fence, or fortress, with infinite labor, I carried all my riches, all my provisions, ammunition, and stores, of which you have the account above. And I made me a large tent, which, to preserve me from the rains, that in one part of the year are very violent there, I made double, namely 1 smaller tent within, and 1 larger tent above it, and covered the uppermost with a large tarpaulin, which I had saved among the sails. And now I lay no more, for a while, in the bed which I had brought on shore, but in a hammock, which was indeed a very good one, and belonged to the mate of the ship. Into this tent I brought all my provisions, and everything that would spoil by the wet, and having thus enclosed all my goods, I made up the entrance, which till now I had left open, and so passed and repassed, as I said, by a short ladder. When I had done this, I began to work my way into the rock, and bringing all the earth and stones that I dug down out of my tent, I laid them up within my fence in the nature of a terrace, that so it raised the ground within about 1.5 feet. And thus I made me a cave just behind my tent, which served me like a cellar to my house. It cost me much labor and many days before all these things were brought back to perfection, and therefore I must go back to some other things, which took up some of my thoughts. Having now fixed my habitation, I found it absolutely necessary to provide a place to make a fire in and fuel to burn, and what I did for that, as also how I enlarged my cave, and what conveniences I made, I shall give a full account of in its place. But I must first give some little amount of myself, and of my thoughts about living, which it may well be supposed were not few. I had a dismal prospect of my conditioning, for as I was not cast away upon that island without being driven, as it said, by a violent storm, quite out of the course of our intended voyage, and a great way, namely, some hundreds of leagues out of the ordinary course of the trade of mankind, I had great reason to consider it as a determination of heaven, that, in this desolate place, and in this desolate manner, I should end my life. The tears would run plentifully down my face when I made these reflections, and sometimes I would expostulate with myself why Providence should thus completely ruin his creatures, and render them so absolutely miserable, so without help abandoned, so entirely depressed, that it could hardly be rational to be thankful for such a life. But something always returned swift upon me to check these thoughts and to reprove me, and particularly one day walking, with my gun in my hand, by the seaside, I was very pensive upon the subject of my present condition, when reason, as it were, expostulated with me the other way, thus: "Well, you are in a desolate condition, it is true, but pray, remember, where are the rest of you? Did not you come 11 of you into the boat? Where are the 10? Why were they not saved, and you lost? Why were you singled out? Is it better to be here or there?" And when I pointed to the sea, all evils are to be considered with the good that is in them, and with that worse attended them. Then it occurred to me, again, how well I was furnished for my subsistence, and what would have been my case if it had not happened, which was 100,000 to 1, that the ship floated from the place where she first struck, and was driven so near the shore that I had time to get all the things out of her. What would have been my case if I had been left to have lived in the condition in which I at first came on shore without necessaries of life, or necessaries to supply and procure them? Particularly, I said aloud, though to myself, what should I have done without a gun, without ammunition, without any tools to make anything or to work with, without clothes, bedding, a tent, or any manner of covering? And that now I had all these to a sufficient quantity, and was in a fair way to provide myself in such a manner as to live without my gun when my ammunition was spent, so that I had a tolerable view of subsisting without my want, as long as I lived, for I considered, from the beginning, how should I provide for the accidents that might happen, and for the time that was to come, even not only after my ammunition should be spent, but even after my health or strength should decay. And now, being about to enter into a melancholy relation of a scene of silent life, such, perhaps, as was never heard of in the world before, I shall take it from its beginning and continue it in its order. It was, by my account, the 30th of September, when, in the manner as above said, I first set foot upon this horrid island, when the sun, being to us in its autumnal equinox, was almost just over my head, for I reckoned myself, by observation, to be in the latitude of 9 degrees 22 minutes north of the line. After I had been there about 10 or 12 days, it came into my thoughts that I should lose my reckoning of time for want of books, and pen and ink, and should even forget the Sabbath days from the working days. But, to prevent this, I cut it with my knife upon a large post, in capital letters, and making it into a great cross, I set it up on the shore where I first landed, namely, I came upon the shore here on the 30th of September, 1659. Upon the sides of this square post I cut every day a notch with my knife, and every seventh notch was as long again as the rest, and every first day of the month as long again as that long one, and thus I kept my calendar, or weekly, monthly, and yearly, reckoning of time. In the next place, we are to observe that among the many things which I brought out of the ship in the several voyages, which, as above mentioned, I made to it, I got several things of less value, but not at all less useful to me, which I omitted settling down before, as, in particular, pens, ink, and paper, several parcels in the captain's mates, gunners, and carpenters' keeping, 3 or 4 compasses, some mathematical instruments, dials, perspectives, charts, and books of navigation, all which I huddled together whether I might want them or no. Also, I found 3 very good Bibles, which came to me in my cargo from England, and which I packed up among my things. Some Portuguese books also, and among them 2 or 3 prayer books and several other books, all of which I carefully secured. And I must not forget that we had in the ship a dog and 2 cats, of whose eminent history I may have occasion to say something in its place. For I carried both the cats with me, and as for the dog, he jumped out of the ship himself, and swam on shore to me the day after I went on shore with my first cargo, and was a trusty servant to me many years. I wanted nothing that he could fetch me, nor any company that he could make up to me. I only wanted to have him talk to me, but that he could not do. As I observed before, I found pen, ink, and paper, and I husbanded them to the utmost. And I shall show that while my ink lasted, I kept things very exact. But after that was gone, I could not. For I could not make any ink by any means that I could devise. And this put me in the mind that I wanted many things, notwithstanding all that I had amassed together. And of these things, this of ink was one, as also spade, pickaxe, and shovel, to dig or remove the earth, needles, pins, and thread. As for linen, I soon learnt to want that without much difficulty. This want of tools made every work I did go on heavily. And it was near a whole year before I had entirely finished my little pale or surrounded habitation. The piles or stakes, which were as heavy as I could well lift, were a long time in cutting and preparing in the woods, and more by far in bringing home, so that I spent sometimes 2 days in cutting and bringing home one of those posts, and a 3rd day in driving it into the ground, for which purpose I got a heavy piece of wood at first, but at last bethought myself of one of the iron crows, which, however, though I found it, yet it made driving those posts or piles very laborious and tedious work. But what need I have been concerned at the tediousness of anything I had to do, seeing I had time enough to do it? Nor had I any other employment, if that it had been over, at least that I could foresee, except the ranging in the island to seek for food, which I did more or less every day. I now began to consider seriously my condition and the circumstances I was reduced to, and I drew up the state of my affairs in writing, not so much to leave them to any that were to come after me, for I was like to have but few heirs, as to deliver my thoughts from daily poring upon them, and afflicting my mind. And as my reason began now to master my despondency, I began to comfort myself as well as I could, and to set the good against the evil, that I might have something to distinguish my case from the worse. And I stated it very impartially, like debtor and creditor, the comforts I enjoyed against the miseries I suffered thus. Evil. I am cast upon a horrible, desolate island, void of all hope of recovery. Good. But I am alive, and not drowned, as all my ship's company was. Evil. I am singled out and separated, as it were, from all the world to be miserable. Good. But I am singled out, too, from all the ship's crew to be spared from death, and he that miraculously saved me from death can deliver me from this condition. Evil. I am divided from mankind, a solitaire, a one banished from human society. Good. but I am not starved and perishing on a barren place, affording no sustenance. Evil. I have no clothes to cover me. Good. But I am in a hot climate where, if I had clothes, I could hardly wear them. Evil. I am without any defense or means to resist any violence of man or beast. Good. But I am cast on an island where I see no wild beast to hurt me, as I saw on the coast of Africa. And what if I had been shipwrecked there? Evil. I have no soul to speak or relieve me. Good. But God wonderfully sent the ship in near enough to the shore that I have gotten out so many necessary things as will either supply my wants or enable me to supply myself, even as long as I live. Upon the whole, here was an undoubted testimony that there was scarce any condition in the world so miserable. But there was something negative or something positive to be thankful for in it. And let this stand as a direction from the experience of the most miserable of all conditions in this world, that we may always find in it something to comfort ourselves from, and to set in the description of good and evil on the credit side of the account. Having now brought my mind a little to relish my condition, and given over looking out to the sea, to see if I could spy a ship, I say, giving over these things, I began to apply myself to accommodate my way of living, and to make things as easy to me as I could. I have already described my habitation, which was a tent, under the side of a rock, surrounded with a strong pale of posts and cables, but I might now rather call it a wall, for I was raised a kind of wall up against it of turfs, about 2 feet thick on the outside, and after some time, I think it was a year and a half, I raised rafters from it, leaning to the rock that thatched or covered it with the boughs of trees, and such things as I could get to keep out of the rain, which I found at some times of the year very violent. I have already observed how I brought all my goods into this pail and into the cave which I had made behind me. But I must observe, too, that at first this was a confused heap of goods, which, as they lay in no order, so they took up all my place. I had no room to turn to myself, so I set myself to enlarge my cave and work farther into the earth. For it was a loose, sandy rock, which yielded easily to the labor I bestowed on it. And so, when I found I was pretty safe as to beasts of prey, I worked sideways to the right hand into the rock, and then, turning to the right again, I worked quite out, and made a door to come out, on the outside of my pale or fortification. This gave me not only egress and regress, as it were a back way to my tent and to my storehouse, but gave me room to stow my goods.